This is a video on how to enter a split level home or a home with basically with a shorter foundation wall where there's kind of a pony wall that's framed on top of that foundation wall. So just a short video on how to enter either of those scenarios into the NEAT audit. One of the things you need to be aware of is when you're entering in your wall surface area into the NEAT audit, you need to represent everything that's on the thermal or pressure boundary of the home. So you'd enter in this case, let's just take this section of this two-story section of the house. You could enter in this wall and this wall and this wall, but there's only a portion of this second story wall that's on the thermal boundary, so you'd want to figure up the square footage for that, and you could, if the roof pitch is small enough, you could just estimate that and maybe even include that into your audit, or if you want to make sure that you get that buffered space out of there, you could do that as well. Either way, you want your insulation to go down until it hits the whatever that level of insulation is in this attic, so that you complete your thermal boundary here. But either way, you want to make sure that you're representing each of these surface areas in the audit so that the audit can evaluate the total heat and cooling loads or heat losses of this house. So you'd measure the upper floor. I think a lot of people have a tendency, they just want to measure from when they walk up to the house, they want to measure from the top of the roof all the way down to the top of the foundation. But a better way to do this is actually to go inside the home and measure from the ceiling down to the floor, and then go down into this basement area and measure from the ceiling down to the top of the foundation. That way you are not accounting for your sill or your rim in the surface area of the wall, because you're going to tell the audit you have a wall and it's made up of, maybe this is a brick home, and so you've got a 2x4 framed wall, platform framed, and it's got a brick veneer on it, or there's some siding on it or whatever. But if you just measure from the top of this wall all the way down to the foundation, or even worse, down to the grading, then you're actually telling the audit that there's more wall to this house than there really is. Because when you get to the foundation section of the audit, that's where it will ask you what the height of your floor joists are, and it'll ask you the length of the perimeter, and that's how it finds this surface area for that floor. So when you're entering in your walls, it's fine if you want to enter in, say this was our north wall, it'd be fine if you wanted to add the surface area of the top part of the wall to the bottom, and put both of those together and say that that's one wall, but you want to make sure that you leave out that floor surface area. Also, when you are calculating, when you get to the foundation tab, in fact, let me go there. So we have a foundation tab. It's going to ask for information about the floor, the sill, and the foundation wall. So since our foundation wall in this example it's really only, what, 4 feet high, I think? So you just measure off of the basement floor up to the top and say, okay, it's 4 feet high. So in the audit, you just say that the height of the foundation wall is 4 feet. The height exposed is either going to be 0 if the dirt goes all the way up to the top. It's more likely that you're going to be like maybe 10% or something, because the ground is really probably going to be 6 or 8 inches below that. So that would be your exterior grading. So, but anyway, just as you would normally would with the basement, just figure out the total height of the foundation wall and the height that it's exposed. The audit looks at a foundation wall as some type of masonry wall. They basically, I spoke with the group that put the audit together, they look at this as either an 8-inch concrete wall or block, or really it could even be a stone foundation, because it's going to look at they've used the R value of masonry at about 8 inches thick. So you only want to represent the part of the foundation that's actually made out of concrete as part of your foundation. Now, the next question is, well, if I'm looking at this foundation separately, then why would I put anything about the floor in there? And because you've got this foundation and it says what's your total floor area and what's the R value of it, and how's it insulated, and do you want to insulate it? Well, in this case, we are talking about this floor. We are not talking about the concrete floor that's down here. Whenever you're doing a foundation, it's talking, usually unless you're doing a slab on grade, it's talking about that ceiling above, and you got to make a determination as to whether or not you're going to insulate that. But the audit tool, it looks at all of the surface area of the thermal and pressure boundary of the house. And so, in fact, a split level is a great example, because on a split level, we typically have either a crawl space or you're going to have a slab on grade. In this example, we've got a slab on grade section of the house, and when I put that portion of the foundation into the audit, it knows that it has this amount of surface area that on the inside is typically around 70 degrees, and on the outside it's typically around 50 or 55, whatever your ground temperature is. And so it knows that there's a delta T. It knows that there's a certain amount of heat loss through that surface of the house. Well, when you enter in a foundation that's like an unfinished basement or a crawl space, crawl space is a great example, because the crawl space, you're basically telling the audit, hey, tell me, you're looking at it saying, do I want to insulate the floor above or do I want to insulate the walls? And you tell the audit the surface area. Well, the audit, when it's calculating the total heat loss, it actually goes to that section and it says, well, since the ceiling of this foundation is 794 square feet, it stands to reason that the floor of the foundation is the same area. And so they use that same area to calculate the amount of dirt floor or the amount of concrete, and they know that there's going to be a delta T there if it's a conditioned space, or if it's a non-conditioned space, then they know it's outside. So you're telling the audit all of these things. With the split level, you need to remember that you are going to tell the audit about this masonry portion, and then you also need to tell the audit about this floor, and you're going to do both of those things on one foundation. So in this example, you'd say, okay, the floor, the total area of that ceiling in that basement area is 794 square feet. Now, since that in our example is going to be inside the conditioned space, we would not want to add any insulation. So we're saying there is no R value, but we're also not going to add anything to it. So it now knows that not only is there a ceiling above that is in a conditioned space, but it also knows that it has a 794 square foot of floor space that is sitting right on the earth. And then the other thing that you want to tell the audit is the sill. Now, you got to be careful when you're doing this, because you're now talking about the surface area of this floor, and on a lot of split homes, that floor is on the thermal boundary on only 3 sides. You do not want to add in you don't want to add up the total perimeter of the floor and include this side in here, because it's inside the envelope. So yeah, this space right here is inside the envelope. You don't want that in there. So you got to make sure that you're just adding up, the length of this perimeter here, which is 24 feet by, I don't remember how wide we were, 28 feet, and then another 24 feet. So that would be 76 feet of total perimeter. So in our example, on the sill, we'd go ahead and put, and remember the perimeter insulates in feet, so we have 76 feet. Our floor joist is in inches, so it's a 10-inch floor. And then we want to evaluate to see if it's cost effective to do some insulation there, if you have any ability to do that, if you have any unfinished space, or if you want to do a drill and fill. But either way, pick the appropriate option there. And then on your foundation wall, the foundation wall, you've got your perimeter is probably going to be different on the foundation wall than the sill, because on this foundation wall, this portion of that wall is part of the thermal boundary. So when you do your perimeter here, that's going to end up being, 28 plus 28 plus 24 plus 24 is 104. So you want to put that total perimeter in there. Let's go ahead and do that. And then if there's any existing, put it there, and if there's not, you'll want to evaluate to insulate that. The other reason why you'd want to separate this section of the wall from this portion of the foundation is that you're probably going to do a pin and drape on this portion of the foundation, where you could do some bats or some do a bib and do some blown in here. So that's much easier. Now, if all of this was finished and you were going to do a closed blow on it, then you could evaluate this section for a closed blow and this section for a closed blow. You'd be just fine as long as you're breaking these pieces apart. So those are just some things to think about with it. Obviously, if it wasn't a split level home, but you had foundation that had some pony walls on top of it, then you can basically just want to make sure you're only accounting for the surface area of the masonry when you come to that foundation section. If this was a home where, say, the foundation walls step down a little bit. In fact, let me draw that real quick. So yeah, if you had a foundation that stepped down or something, basically you want to make sure that you're representing the total surface area of that foundation wherever it is part of the thermal boundary. So if there's a section of it that's not part of the thermal boundary, make sure you leave that off, but really you want to represent this 4-foot high wall here. This would be an 8-foot high wall, and then over here it kind of steps down, so you'd have an average of 6 feet high on this side, back down to 4. So you've got to kind of do some averaging here, but if you've got two walls that are 4 feet high, one that's 6 and one that's 8, then you could probably average all of them to about a 6-foot high wall, and say your foundation is 6 feet high and it has this much perimeter, and then the percentage that is exposed. And then you'd want to make sure that you're putting in this portion of the wood framed portion of the wall either as a separate wall, or that you're including that surface area in the wall above when you do that. So that's it. Just if you ever need to, take a minute and draw these things on paper. It might help so that you can really think about where the thermal boundary is and what aspects of it you want to make sure that you're accounting for. Basically, the bigger the thermal boundary, the more the heat loss and gain, which means that if you make sure and represent everything, every aspect of your thermal boundary, that will increase the likelihood that your clients will receive more of a benefit, because if the thermal boundary is bigger, there's more heat loss and gain. That means that the payback between an old 60% efficient furnace versus a 95%